Okay, so this is probably like the worst situation to try and stream in because it's hot as hell out. So I have my door open in a place I share with flatmates, and I've got laundry going in the background, and a fan is on directly behind me, and I'm waiting for pizza to be delivered because screw going and grabbing pizza or cooking in this temperature. But in any case, I find myself in the rather unique position recently, of being able to make the video because nobody else is online to play video games with at the moment. And there's been probably like a half dozen things I've been making to make videos of, whether it be my own ideas or iterating on stuff or just responding to people on Reddit about builds and whatnot, concepts such as reloading with the Hadron, and figure now is as good a time as any to start working on them. And hilariously, because somebody sold something, I can buy another thing, so I guess that gets to be a part of the stream too, on top of being potentially interrupted for pizza delivery. But in any case, I figure this is probably one of the more straightforward builds to iterate on. Topic being rather straightforward to begin with, as opposed to some of the other ones. So whether or not that ends up actually being the case, we'll see. But I'm hoping can get it done within the next half hour or so. Basically, the background for the build is this was designed by the clan member as a tanky raid build. So rather than use the Bastion, which has issues dealing with Dawn's children and the hard raids, they used the Machinist cabin, which they got, as you can see, fused from the Battle Pass, as well as their Vindicator, likewise. And they just kind of ran with this. So interestingly, with the co-driver rework, my suggestions on this kind of topic have changed. So for those who weren't aware, beforehand when we had the old co-driver, there was the Hans co-driver, and they gave a +5 kph speed bonus to every Steppenwolf cabin. So that was the Jawbreaker, the Humpback, the Bastion, and the Cohort. So if you were running them, you'd end up starting with a vehicle that has a max cabin speed of 65, and then that could be increased proportionally by using the Hans co-driver, or sorry, by using engines on top of the Hans co-driver. So it was a really, I don't want to say a popular idea of mine, but a tool that I used quite frequently to that end was I would run the armored tracks on a Steppenwolf's cabin, which have a max speed of 60 to begin with. And then I'd slap on the Geagle, which makes the max chassis speed, the max movement speed for that 70 kph. And then it would also boost the cabin speed by 8%. So that would get you from 65 up to about 70 kph, and you'd be able to go, well, 70 kph with your builds. So it would work as a raid build, which lets you go a little bit faster, as well as being quite a bit tankier with the other perks and talents that I had going on. So now that that's not a thing, as you can probably tell from this build here and the number V6 indicating a lot of reworks, I have kind of had to rethink how to sort of do the movement speed with that. So I'm still a fan of using the armored tracks for the 60 kph, but I can save an energy point by not using the Geagle, because the Geagle kicks the tracks up to a max speed of 70 whilst leaving the Cohort or other Steppenwolf cabin still at 60 kph. It only gets boosted up to 65 kph, so I'm not able to match the speed of the cabin with the tracks, and you know, to what degree that's important will vary from individual to individual. It's only like, you know, an 8% speed increase, so I feel like it's not nearly as important as being able to slap on another unit of whatever. So in my case with this build, I slapped on the Doppler instead, so that the task of it doesn't need to be outsourced. And to a certain degree, that was sort of the root of this build, is it was meant to be a semi-support build for the team, so she was running it with, for instance, the Maxwell. So that can now be taken off. Additionally, and this was true beforehand, with Hans as well, but because the Machinist is not a Hans, a Steppenwolf cabin, therefore affected by Hans, it wasn't able to go up to 70 kph beforehand with the Geagle either. It was capped at the 65 because it can't get the +5 from Hans. So what you could do instead is run the same idea of running the cabin with the Geagle, and you'd be capped at 65 instead. So likewise, you can still do this now with any of the heavy cabins that are going 60 kph. Like I said, haven't entirely reworked my other build, but I am interested in looking at reworking hers. So between the changing co-drivers and then just the uniqueness of it overall. And I know a lot of people will argue that the Machinist is inherently worse than the Cohort, and that comes up on the Reddit quite frequently. To what degree you agree or disagree with that, of course, is going to vary from individual to individual. As my voice is cracking every like 30 seconds, going to grab a drink of water, further making the stream excruciating. But of course it's not water, because it's the weekend, and what pairs better with pizza than iced tea? Definitely not product placement. Didn't even mention the brand. I could. It's a good brand, but I won't. Semi-relatedly, I also made cookies, and I don't think they were in the oven long enough. So if I die mysteriously of what appears to be food poisoning over the next couple of days or weeks, however long it takes for salmonella to manifest, it's probably that and not my flatmates poisoning me because I'm moving out and forcing them to look at new housing situations in one of the highest cost of living locations in Canada. Right, so anyway, as far as the build, pretty straightforward in concept, where it's going to be running the fixed angle machine guns line, specifically the tacklers in my case, because I don't own a Vindicator. And we'll see what else we can do. But the root idea is making it more tanky, especially against enemies in raids, since having guns just slapped on the outside of your build like that don't tend to work too great in PvP. I know very well, even on this, while it's a incredibly cool theory, it gets stripped real easily. I know Bang Shield made a variant of this build where they mounted the tacklers underneath and used armored tracks on the side to protect them, and he said that went extremely well for him. Be that as it may, I don't really like restricting firing angles, especially more than I have to on already firing angle restricted vehicles. So what I'm going to look at doing here is probably pulling out the tank tracks, so I have them offset about their center, if that makes any sort of sense. Hopefully, well, when I do it. But I feel like this is sort of a intuition thing rather than me knowing the math behind it. I believe that if you have the mass centered... Okay, let me back up. I believe that tracks rotate around their center, which is kind of logical, which is to say if you were to turn to the left, for instance, the front half would kick left and the back half would kick right while you're trying to do the turn, essentially. So your center rotation would be in the center. So that I feel pretty confident with saying is the case. If for no other reason, then that would be the easiest way to just code things, is to rotate them around their center rather than some arbitrary other point based off of their like physical mass in real space or whatever engineering actually went into the tank tracks IRL or whatnot. The further assumption I'm operating off of, just again by intuition, is that if you have multiple, they will work in series, which is to say, again, if you have the mass centered between two tracks stacked forward backwards, the new center rotation will be in between the two of those, which again I think logically makes sense. Now, I don't have any math degrees and very little experience to begin with, but I'm pretty sure that if you have them overlapping, you want it to be about half and half, so that the center rotation of one is on the edge of rotation of the other and vice versa. I don't know whether or not that's factually correct, but that's going to be one of the things I'm looking at changing with this, and then as well as pulling the cabin back a little bit, because a lot of the time currently what happens is, because it is a build where you can only really deal damage to enemies to the front, you end up having your front facing them a lot, so your cabin takes a lot of direct damage, and as a result you end up dying with a lot of armor still on the build, as opposed to my other build and, you know, videos I made on it and whatnot, where you can actually run you know, instances where you're using the sides as armor, or if you're running turreted weapons like the Cyclones, being able to use basically all sides to increase your longevity. That's not much of an option with this. So to that end, recognizing that that's sort of just a reality of the build and using it in raids and having fixed angled weapons, pulling that back and having some more stuff defending it in the front. So I'm just going to strip off quite a bit of armor to try and move around the internals a bit, because I feel like that's, you know, pretty important part. Especially if we're looking at getting rid of the Maxwell. I will just slap on another tackler for now, just to show the place of the Vindicator, even though obviously it's not actually a Vindicator, but same energy, similar mass, so whatever. I will say I do like the profile of this, sort of having the angled sides leading up to the somewhat, or sorry, I guess rather, the flat of the tracks, and then the angled of the armor, and then the flat of the armor, and then angling again up on the roof. So to what degree I end up emulating that, we'll see. I know on the exhibition, for art builds at least, people really like sort of mimicking the shape of the machinist all the way down the length of it. So you can kind of see that with builds like this, where you have, again, sort of the flat once it stops flaring out, having it be more or less flush with that, and then the curvature of the roof for as much as you can. So let's see if there's any better examples. Yeah, something like that. So trying to maintain that all the way through. To what degree that's going to be possible, I don't know. We'll see. But trying to use the overall shape of the cabin as the base and extending from there, which is something I've tried doing in the past, again, with the heavy being a good example of that, where I tried to round off the sides here, but still have the very flat top roof in front. So we'll try and preserve that sort of overall look with the armor. Might end up doing it with different armor pieces, but we'll have to see how it goes. Armoring is always its own beast and done at the end anyway, so. She also certainly did not shy away from using a lot of the pieces. Should also probably be noted that my cabin is not fused, so I don't actually have as much of a max mass as hers does. So I'm capped at 27,000, and hers was capped at 29,000, almost 30,000. But she also didn't build right up to that max mass, so I can basically play around with getting up to 28,000 on my build, so even if it's overweight like a little bit, that's fine. Again, for the difference in mass being almost non-existent between the two weapons, and then the cabin not having a minus mass fusion on it, should be pretty similar overall, just basically, you know, how close I get over the limit. Another factor is, of course, going to be how many parts are available that, you know, she and I share that she has available to build. I am at the point where I have a significant amount of prestige parts available, and obviously that's not going to be the same for everybody else, but I'm going to try and get pretty close to using just the base faction parts, which again shouldn't be too difficult since I'm trying to, try and keep that look, maybe using some Avia parts on the top or otherwise sticking with Steppenwolf parts. So. Alright, so I think that's all the armor taken off. So you can kind of see have a solid block of modules in the center using the blue radiator and cooler. Probably better off using, purples if one has them. I don't think that's the case here. And then using the absolutely delicious shape of the bootstrap inside the machinist. I mean, they 100% planned this, but it fits like perfectly. If you're watching, you haven't noticed this before, you haven't seen it before, allow me to enlighten, because the gap, oh, this is killing me. Wasn't able to place it early because it has a little hook on the front. The gap at the back is like the perfect size for a couple of different things. So obviously there's a 2x2x4 there, very reminiscent of what is on the back of the cockpit cabin. And so you could place any, 2x2x4 module there. So you could look at putting a hardcore or, a couple of ammo packs or a cooler, whatever you want there. And then there's a 6x5x2. So you can actually somewhat fit a Apollo back here, because due to the shape of the Apollo, it's a roughly a 6x6x2, but it's not perfectly like that. It actually has the corners rounded off, as you can see here. So what that actually allows you to do, interestingly, and again, I haven't seen people do this. I don't suspect this is going to make a new, wave of people doing it or anything. But you can actually build around the Apollo in its quote-unquote footprint, either with the, obviously the 1x's, but also the 2x frames, since they don't tend to stick out past the cabin's width anyway. You can easily run something like that, and then say if you want to use the frame space behind the Apollo, even slap in a ammo pack or something like that. So you are using the frames to hide your hardware as per usual in most other builds, and it fits absolutely deliciously. And again, it's kind of hard to tell for the builds because of course a lot of them, especially the ones that are designed to be more PvP, PvE viable, you can't exactly see through them. Your best case is generally just trying to flip them and seeing if you can see through the frames, especially since on a lot of these larger builds that are closer to the mass limit, they tend to have some gaps. They don't always frame or have frames as like an entire unbroken block, but will have gaps like, yeah, you can see in the middle there. So it looks like, yeah, they actually did exactly what I was talking about in here, where you can see the Apollo is actually sitting in the larger chamber on the back of the build. But I know some of the others haven't. And again, it's not like they're wrong to do so. Obviously, you make some choices with the structural integrity when you end up taking out a gap in the frames in the direct middle. But in any case, that's an option. However, if you don't want to go that way, you also have the absolutely phenomenal option of running the bootstrap in that gap, which is a 5x4x2 with a 2x2x4 attached on it. So as you can see, it fits like perfectly in the niche, or in part of both niches, and then you still have some gaps on the side where you can slap some other things. So she was using it, she had a radio on one side and a structural part on the other, but obviously anything that you wanted to, you could fit in there. So in theory, even if you wanted to have the armor stick out a little bit, you can do that. Now you have it sticking up by, you know, a little bit by 6 parts, and then you can run other armor pieces that are that length. Probably something more like the crane parts though, or, you know, whatever sparks joy. But in case, you have options there, and it just matches up beautifully. So definitely not going to change around the bootstrap at the very least. If I were running a build that was not running the Apollo and had ammo, I would probably stick the armor pack, or sorry, the ammo packs in there, since then that way all your explosives are right next to each other. So yeah, if one of them pops, they all pop, but you don't have, you know, part of your build getting gimped elsewhere because you have multiple places for explosives to be destroyed, and there's like literally no safer place for them to be than, you know, tucked in a nook on the cabin. So doing something like that is probably what I'd look at for the ammo / reloading weapons. That's obviously not much of a factor here though, so just thought it was worth mention nonetheless. So we're going to want to keep a radiator and cooler for sure. Radio certainly doesn't help, although could probably find a 2x2x2 spot somewhere else. Eagle, sort of important for the build as mentioned earlier. We can do without the Maxwell though, so that saves in energy. As far as how useful that one energy is, we'll see. I'm thinking honestly the easiest solution might just be slapping an inverter module in, since it's effectively a straight increase in health, especially while you're tanking with the parts that are in contact with it. But theoretically you could do things like run interceptors, Argus, you could run a carjack, although that doesn't, in theory, shouldn't be much of an issue. You could run cloak, you could run invisibility detection, you know, whatever. You have a bunch of different options. I think for the sake of you know, making it straightforward, again, sort of as I discussed with the other build, my tanky build, having it be a one that's focused on tanking and raids, it makes sense to try and min-max on that by, you know, making it tankier. So that was the end decision I ended up doing with my other build, and is convenient for the sake of 1 energy point. And if you're cabin tanking anyway, so I think it'll probably be very much the same way here, but we'll give it a go. I also think my pizza is here, although they did not apparently read the directions to knock and leave it at the door, so I'm gonna go grab that real quick. Right, now I have Temptation, I'd say at my feet, more like at my elbow, but can probably wait till after the stream, assuming it doesn't take like literal hours to put this build together. And normally it doesn't, but sometimes things go through a lot more iteration than I expect they will. So as far as what we're gonna do, I think just sort of getting the general mass of the build centered first wouldn't be a bad first step. So I want to say that the tracks are like 24 long. No, because of course we can't have things be nice and easy. They are 26 long. Again, whether or not they center mass around the tracks or run physics differently, I don't know. In any case, it looks like luckily it's about a pip and a half off from the back, and a pip and a half, more of 2 pips, but a pip and a half ish on the front as well. So if they are centering it on the tracks, it should also be centered on the overall length of it. Hopefully that's what I'm hoping for. So we're going to be looking for having it 13 pips off of the front for it to be centered. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Which may or may not have been exactly where I had it beforehand. No, I had it 14 off. You can see because the offset of it from the tackler changed, so. Well, that's what you get for just eyeballing things, kids. Gotta make sure to do things precise. Again, assuming, you know, that this is actually how it works. I have a feeling that the nature of it being like not a precise thing that I'm doing either, you know, being guesswork, being a factor. Who knows, it might end up actually being better to have it significantly further out or further forward and overlapping, whatever. I do not know. Am I tripping, or it looks like these may not have been lined. Okay, no. Just losing my mind, no big deal. It looked like the front wasn't lined up on the tracks, but the fact that the back are lined up leads me to believe that it probably is. So, okay, so repeating on the other side, just do the 1 pip overlap with the tackler. Great, okay. So that'll be approximately the size we want if we have the cabin centered on that. This is where things get kind of tricky. Because again, the machinist has that little lip on the front. It means I can't very easily wrap frames around. And even though it shows the pips as being connectable, as you can see them here, that you can't actually do that. So unless I make the build 2 pips wider, I can't actually wrap frames around the front. I don't think that's inherently an issue per se, since we do have the frames connecting them at the back, and then those are protected by the cabin, so there's like pretty low chance, unless you're fighting somebody with scorpions, or i.e. bots with scorpions, which is a thing, it is a factor to be fair, or getting shot at from the front, or sorry, rather from the back, that those frames really shouldn't have any risk of being destroyed. But we'll see how it goes. As far as the center mass, it's... yeah, it seems pretty heavily biased towards the cabin. That makes sense, because it probably weighs more than all the tracks together. Yeah, 5,300 versus 6,000. So if we want it to be centered, then we want it to be basically in that entire overlap zone, so we can push it 1 forward. It's now 1 pip. The nose is 1 pip behind the back, or the first pip of the overlap, and its back is 1 pip before back of the overlap. So that should work. That should theoretically be like the true center of mass, where if I deleted this and replaced it with an incredibly light cabin in the same spot. Actually, what is the lightest cabin? I'd assume the Duster, yeah. Not much of a improvement over the Sprinter, but... so we do that, same thing, 3 pips from the back, and 4 pips from the front, because it's not the same amount of pips in length. Great. Anyway, ignoring that, should be, yeah, even with all the mass of the other parts, it's still centered. Excellent. Okay, so that's more or less where we want it. I'm gonna just shunt the 8x frames up. The under section is only 6 long. So what I can do in other cabins, which has been mentioned before by me and many others certainly, is, what's a good example? Probably the humpback. Or better yet, the cohort, because I think it's actually an odd number. So you can see here, yeah, so this is 9 pips long. So I don't think the humpback actually is. Yeah, and this is 8. So what you can do, which is very convenient with the significantly longer cabins, is that you can run frame something like this. And then leave a gap of 1 on the front and back. And that lets you connect other frames directly to the cabin, even though they jut out significantly further ahead or behind. What that allows you to do is if you remove those frames, you still have the other stretched out frames. And as a result, you can actually get rid of the middle frames altogether unless you have wheels or something anchored here that actually needs that direct connection. And you can put things like modules or, in the sake of, for instance, the humpback or the cohort, like entire, you know, hardware pieces underneath, like generators and whatnot. So because of the lack of length of the connection pips here, we don't actually have much of an option there, unfortunately. What I can do is run an 8x4 frame there. Now that means that it's not going to interfere with if you, for instance, wanted to, you know, change the fit on this build and make it so it's like the Apollo again. She'll get angry because I already have the bootstrap. Then you can still wrap frames around without interfering with the framework here. And we can also have some redundancy for frames on the front. So for instance, I can, this kind of gets yucky due to how many spaces I have left. So I can run that, have some redundancy. This frame gets shot off for whatever reason, boom bam, your front stuff's still connected, likewise with the alternative. Now, we do have the quote-unquote problem where the frame obviously sticks out. So that could be a benefit theoretically if we wanted to have some overlap or if we wanted to attach frames on the side. However, I'm not so sure I'm a fan of that idea. I think I'd rather just have flat ones all the way back across here. So what I could do is just ignore the little gaps, deal with it, build around it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to check where the center of mass actually is for just the cabin. Because I have a feeling with it having a hollowed out back, whether or not they actually did like a math physics-based approach for the center of mass or whether they just manually placed it. I imagine they probably placed it forward a little bit more. So it's not actually centered and thus this entire build's mass isn't centered yet. Hoping that's the case. Actually looks like it's further back than the center, which honestly is even more surprising. So if I put in some very light stuff just to make sure it sits flat on the ground, we have what, about 11 pips here of cabin light, and it looks like it's on the 4th from the back, which is closest to the side where all the pieces are missing in the hollowed out back. So that's surprising to me. It does mean though, in theory, we can actually push the cabin forward a bit. So we want the center of mass to be 4 from the back of the cabin. So if we have the center of mass currently here, and we want to move it to however far off it is. This is just me overcomplicating things. Then the center is actually a pip itself. It's not actually the split between 2 pips, unfortunately, based off of where the center of this overlap is. So can probably just choose it again for the sake of the front being 2 off from the track, and also being probably lighter, maybe, due to it just being this part sticking out at the front. I don't know. We can say that our intended center of mass is maybe closer to there, so we can just push the cabin forward one so the center mass lines up with that. Again, whether or not this is actually perfect, I don't know. I don't expect this to be mathematically correct, but for it being close enough-ish to being correct, and as close as we're probably going to get with the measurements of the things we have, I think it'll be just fine. So the reason why, I guess I didn't even go over why this would be important. The reason why I think this is important is if you have your center rotation offset significantly from the mass, which I'm going to try and demonstrate here by having a very light use of frames, as light as one is commanded. Is that if you have your center of your mass centered on the center of rotation, then things are real nice and turn. But if you end up sticking a bunch of mass really, really far out on one side or another, which I can display with gonna be such a dumb way of doing this. Okay. So if you have a bunch of mass way out on one side, assuming this doesn't immediately tip over. Let's try it with that. Then your rotation gets a little bit janky. Because now the build's trying to rotate around your center of mass rather than using the center rotation. So doing anything looks like turning at high speed gets a lot harder. It's actually doing pretty okay currently, but I have a feeling it's just because there's not a whole lot of mass on it to begin with. Suppose here I'm like basically able to turn almost on the spot. Right, so if we put that there, that's what the new center, right? Yeah, full picture. Good. Okay. Kind of like having the frames again. Again, don't mind them being heavy since we have like 29,000 kilos to play with. 29 tons if you would. Now we do have the even number of pips here, so we can run 6 buys. And then we have yucky numbers again because we go back to having a width of the interior plus the track width, which is actually 3, not a nice even number and or power of 2 like pretty much everything in the game likes working on. So as you could probably see earlier, you can't run 2 6s in Connect, and you can't run 2 8s without them overlapping, but you can sort of interweave them, which should, in theory, also give it better structural integrity. Certainly more so than going with the vertical, longitudinal, I guess, rather ones. Might end up changing the ideal with this quite a bit, just because this is going to be really heavy and not really offer a whole lot more redundancy benefits. I will say, I love how that lines up with the back literally perfectly for like, I guess if you made sort of a carrier build with this, so you know, had a coupler module, whatever it's called, contact, had a buddy connected, you're basically a little truck to drive them around, and this could work pretty well. Not so sure we'll end up keeping all of the frames, because we might end up wanting to change them out for at least light ones, so we have more mass to play around with for armor. But we'll give it a go when we get there. Might end up removing a lot of them to begin with. I know I do also like having frames on the front to serve as a base on which to build armor off of, and that's not an option here with the machinist's width, unless again I push it out further. I could theoretically run like a V shape in the opposite direction, so have it flare out in the front rather than the back, but for fitting the profile of the cab, I think I like it like this. I'll have to see how it goes. Next thing's next. I guess it probably makes sense to figure out where we want to put the guns to give them a range of fire, because we don't want to block them with the cabin. So it looks like it's probably as far as we're going to get for angles, which unfortunately doesn't line up flush nice with the side. But if we kick it back any further, then we lose angles apparently with it not liking to wrap around the cabin. Whether or not that's actually the case, I don't know, because I know sometimes the gun barrels don't actually play the way they say they should. Yeah, see, that's annoying, because right now it's not letting me fire since it reads the cabin as being in the way. And I really dislike that, because I'd rather have it do that and fire in the general direction, even if it can't turn further, than to have it just say, nope, sorry, can't aim. So I think personally I would like to leave it there, even though it looks even worse than having it back to 1 pip or the 2, which would be ideal. User preference, of course. Very likewise, I don't have any vindicators or protectors or defenders to check, but I imagine that has a different place where the angle is blocked. Although I guess it might not be as much of an issue, quote unquote, since it has shallower vertical depth, which is now horizontal now that we've rotated it. But again, I don't like restricting the weapon if I don't have to, so I wouldn't want to run those sideways anyway. I know that she did on her original version of it. I probably would have preferred having it sticking out, or maybe sticking it underneath or something, just so it has the full horizontal range of fire. But you know, to each their own. I do like the idea of having the Aurora on the top. Do love the idea of surrounding it with reflectors. Not so sure about the aesthetic of it, but I think functionally it'll do just fine. Can't really think of better fenders to stick up there. Arguably you could again get rid of them, because bots don't generally, emphasis on generally, target the cabin. or sorry, target the weapons. They generally exclusively target the cabin, but no sense in making it easier for them to degun if they change their mind, or, you know, errant shots or whatnot. Also like having it somewhat flush with the back. Unfortunate that the reflector gets limited rotation, but at the same time, again, for the sake of us primarily shooting forward, issue is annoying again how it's cut off, but it looks like everything's pretty much cut off at that same angle. So worth noting that the one tackler can actually aim further down than the other, and that's because they're asymmetrical, which is horrible. But that's the thing. In theory, if you want to work around it, you could pull the cabin and everything up super far so that the bottom angle of rotation, bottom viewing angle, whatever, is also not blocked by the tracks so that it aims straight down. That may have actually been what she was going for originally. Maybe not with the blocks anyway. But unless I want to put the cabin back out front without a whole lot of armor protecting it, I don't really have a lot of options. Yeah. It's unfortunate. I know one of the main complaints about the Machinist is the complete lack of frontal pips. Luckily, I don't know how many people know this, but you can actually connect things directly to movement parts. So while not frames, you can have parts connected to the tank tracks, have the tank tracks connected to the frames, have the frames connected to the cabin, in a roundabout durability thing. So of course, if the movement part gets shot off, you lose all of those parts that are connected. But if you have them anchored on both sides, it should be more or less okay. Likewise, if somebody was a smart noodle and knew about this, and you had a bunch of armor looking something like... This, for instance, looks pretty friggin' intimidating, but all they have to do is actually make it look a little bit better. Because this is realistically something I could foresee doing for trying to protect the front a bit more. I think this will pass. Well, so if you slap something like that, looks really intimidating, looks like they got a lot of health to chew through. But realistically, if they just get rid of the part connecting to the tank tracks, you die. Which again is kind of why frames are pretty useful. But I'm pretty sure frames have to be connected to the cabin. You can't just... Yeah. You can't just have them unconnected, unfortunately. So likewise, I can place them there, but they're not connected to anything. So as soon as that gets shot, you'll lose them. Or rather, sorry, you can't even enter the game with those parts like that. As they're unanchored, they're not connected to the cabin directly. So another point for why it might be better to push the cabin forward, you know, on top of the whole gun depression thing. But I think it'll be very much a muck around and find out. See, test if it feels better or not. Because theoretically, with all the stuff you throw on it for the back and armor and whatnot, your center mass should be hopefully pretty much in that center rotation spot anyway. In fact, this might be somewhat disadvantageous for the sake of having to backload a lot of the armor, or, well, rather front load a lot of the armor so the center mass stays still, where it's, again, not really an inherently durable spot. But I think for the sake of having it tank more damage for the cabin, it'll be somewhat necessary. So, how do we want to shape the back? Like I said, I am interested in the sort of keeping the overall look of it. At the same time, I can't exactly do that either realistically due to the limitations of having the cabin exposed and taking damage. I do think I would want it flat on the back. Maybe having some tapering up on the sides. Going from there. I don't know. It'll be kind of hard to, I think, marry the rounded corners with the sharp ones. I suppose too, you can always just do it higher so the tracks aren't in the way. Not in the way as much, I guess. Not that I'm a fan of that look either. Let's see, what did she do? I think she just enclosed everything, right? Yeah, pretty much. I think unfortunately we'll kind of have to do the same, where we recognize we can't actually fully use the curves of the cabin if we want to have the cabin protected from the sides, so we'll need some stuff there. Can probably, I mean, we have an enormous amount of space here at the back, so I don't think I have issues with using some of the larger footprint parts. Kind of reminiscent of the curves. Doesn't really end off on the front here terribly well. But I suppose we could actually make it look quite a bit better by doing something like that. Although it doesn't quite match the shape, of course. It's passable. And the alternative kind of feels like just leaving it blank, which I wouldn't want to do either. I suppose you could use the corner parts. Doesn't look any better. And then of course we have issues with things not lined up. So we might actually need to pull it back one anyway. Even though that blocks firing angles. Wow, yeah, there are a whole lot of considerations for this build that I'm not particularly happy about. Kind of feels like everything is working against the goal here. Although perhaps not unfair to say, maybe the goal of, you know, making it look better while protecting the cabin was not really the best one to go about doing to begin with. If functionally it was working before. What do we got? Oh, good raids, not enough time to do. I can pull that back. We can run. Rounded parts. Kind of. It's gonna be kind of hard to cap those though. Could run it the other way. That lines up a lot nicer. That's looking good so far. Slap on the corners. grabbed the wrong one, thinking it was the right one. Thinking I was more clever than the game. Huh. That could work. I can muck with that. Maybe give it one curves like that. I hate this because I know exactly how this is going to look and it's terrible because I've tried it before. But like that to soften the curves on the side. Not make it as harsh of a change from the horizontal to vertical. I suppose you could just get rid of them altogether. Where's the fun in that? Question how I'd even begin to taper off the front here. The answer is you don't. Again, I've tried a lot without much success. But can do that. And then a whole heck of a lot of armor. Question where the other panel. Okay, cool. We've already got placed. And say, boom, bam. And you can have slap a bunch more armor on either side, and then you have an entire middle section left open. But hey, at least it makes a couple of builds a lot easier. Okay. Now, I'm really not hating the look of this. We'll have some more issues with actually connecting the left side to the right, just due to the nature of all these crane parts being 6 wide instead of 8. So you can see it's actually offset a little bit. I don't really know what the solution is to that, if there is one at all. The answer might be just offset everything again. Not particularly a fan of. But I could maybe just cheat these forward instead a little bit. It's doable. Unfortunately, while I love the aesthetic of these parts, they really do have a very limited amount of ones that work for actually rounding stuff off as a result of them being all the way they are. So you end up with a lot of problems. Kind of like that. What am I doing wrong here? Doesn't look half bad on the outside. Not so great on the interior though. And of course these parts are the worst because they're 7. But I suppose in theory that could actually be beneficial if we somehow managed to fit the curves in. But you basically need to run like the end cap for the other ones. I don't know how you do that to make it look nice. Maybe upside down. Kind of works. So close, but so far away. I guess the logical thing would just be do the same as on the top, wouldn't it? Just run those parts in reverse. Since we already know it works. And then we still need to figure out something that carries it down and ends on the other side nicely without leaving this gap. So you probably cheese a little bit with some sort of decor part. Filling in the rest of the gap should be pretty easy because I think it's a power of 2 now, isn't it? It's still 10. Well, get there when we get there. I'm really liking overall how this is looking so far. Which naturally isn't the point of builds to look nice, but it sure is a really big positive when they do. Arguably don't need that piece there, nor that, so I can find some other way to do it. Iteration, ladies and gentlemen. What am I missing here? Feels weird that's the same piece twice. Suppose it should be more like that actually does look quite a bit better. Maybe I'll keep it like that. It's actually kind of funny because that is like the perfect shape for something like that. But I don't know if we'll end up getting much chance to use it just due to how many parts this monster is already going to have. But that does actually taper it off a lot nicer than any of the other ideas I tried before now, so maybe that is the solution. Looks really, really good. Looks really close to looking really, really good. Have those pesky angry issues there. Which I don't know how you'd go about overcoming. What do I do for that? Could just fit more plugs in. Well, obviously it doesn't look the best. I'm not really sure what other options are. It's not like we have, you know, spacers, unfortunately. Maybe more of these. Kind of works. That's the problem. Everything is so close to working, yet not. The eternal struggle. Plus, it's inflating the parts count significantly. Just doing this in the sake of trying to make it look better. Ugh. Of course, I can't roof that very easily. And with the mass and the part limit restrictions, going to have a lot of this hollow. What's 2 do? Can't really push them in one. If I pushed the cabin up all the way, then I could. And I could have better tapering on the side, and the back would line up, but it would require the parts to be overlapped by 1 pip on the side like that. Which could work better for when the guns are the 2 pips high by the 4 pips rather than the 3 by 2. Decisions. So I think for the sake of most of these frames being redundant anyway, I can definitely say yeet 'em, or at least replace them with any lighter weight counterparts. Probably want to keep those just for redundancy. We'll see. Probably want to finish the top with these bad boys at the end. Except they don't fit like that, and they don't really look good like that. Damn, well the good news, Regan, is I figured out how to make it look good. I just don't know how to make it functional. That could work. Other than the frames again. Almost works. Again and again. I feel like if I could find something that works for the side backs there that's only one thick rather than two, would solve a lot of my issues, but I don't really know what options exist for that, because again the frame splits are extremely limited. So that works, it sticks down, but then that gives me a 12 wide area to work with. Well, it's going to be hard to taper that bottom off.
Hiya.
So, disclaimer, I am streaming. And
Okay.
for better or worse, I'm streaming trying to iterate on your build. And it's been an hour, and I, mind you, did get mildly sidetracked with discussions about stuff as per usual that nobody asked about. But it makes me cry, Regan. It's
no. Rough.
It's, yeah, I mean, like, you can look at the stream. I still need to eat my pizza. But,
so much to do.
Yeah, like, I have, I think, something that looks pretty good.
Okay.
But it's, like, not even close to being, like, functionally good, you dig?
That's fine. You know, I'm sure it'll make everybody in hard raid super happy and it'll go fine.
Well, it's like the sort of thing where I tried to, like... So I pulled the cabin back and I pushed some of the tracks forward to try and make it, like, easier to turn in place and have more armor on the cabin.
Yep.
And as a result of doing those changes, I've ended up making an enormous ass on the build. And the problem is it's really hard to fill that with the part limit and the mass limit.
Rough.
And it almost is like it would be better if it was like a carrier build, like a fusion build.
Oh, a fusion hard raid build? Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. I'm ready.
Yeah. It's... Ugh.
So close to perfection. Got it.
It's... Like, it's pretty... I think it's getting there. It's just... I don't know if it'll actually end up getting all the way there, you know?
Make it into a Leviathan. GG easy.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I do not know. Like, I love
sorry, I gotta... People something. 1 second.
Okay.
Alrighty, sorry about that. Back now.
Okay.
You were saying?
Oh, I just found it funny that your explaining was longer than your actual being done.
You got me there.
Yeah, like you can see on the stream kind of what I'm going for, but it's like, I don't know. I don't know.
Oh no! Sort of sounds like a new fusion build, but...
Yeah.
Could run tacklers, I could run tacklers. We can all run tacklers.
I don't know. I have a feeling that unfortunately this is going to be the kind of build that gets iterated on a few times to get to a state where I'm happy with it.
I'm gonna go with isn't that the best builds? Something
like,
to look forward to, right?
Like, I don't want to make it hollow. I absolutely hate that. But I also don't know how I would even go about filling the gaps that I still have, and I haven't even finished, like, the outer sides of how it looks.
Rough. And you're at part limit, right?
No, not yet. It's 12 parts off, and it's about... Can still put on another 5,000 kilos, but like 12 parts is... That's not a lot. And I could remove
Yeah, I
some of the
see.
smaller ones, but... Are you watching the stream?
Yeah, I opened it up.
Bang Shield's lying to us now. A good-looking build. Well, okay, maybe not lying. It's a good-looking build, but the problem is it isn't good. It doesn't feel good. It's not done yet.
It's so close to perfection.
Sorry, you were saying?
Like, are all the internals set up?
No, well, no. Sorry, are you watching the stream?
Yeah, I have it open.
So I have everything on the side here, other than the mystery module from removing the radar. I have the Vindicator replaced with a Tackler just because that's what I have. And then, you know, I guess in theory, be super lame and just go back to the 4 Tackler idea. Get rid of the Aurora.
Could work.
Everyone's favorite. Just making the same build with slightly different flavors over and over.
Certainly
Boom, bam.
sounds like a good
Go,
time.
bam, pew, pew.
Old.
Oh wow, one of these guns has hella issues with aiming. Yeah, the bottom road is not like firing.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Sounds like it just needs 2 Vindicators instead.
Yeah, well I reckon like you could probably just place the Vindicator in like, you know, on the side here instead. So like that seemed to be easy enough depending on gun depression and whatnot.
Yep.
But I don't even know what the other module would be. I was thinking probably the Averter, just because it helps you be tankier, and like what else are you going to spend 1 energy on? Like a cloak wouldn't really help a build this size. And since it's
Hardjack,
primarily for
GGs.
raids, like, well, you shouldn't be flipping to begin with. I know you do a lot of that.
It's my specialty, what can I say?
Well, and like I could theoretically get rid of a lot of mass just by removing all the frames that aren't actually being used. But like, I'm not so sure that's necessarily the answer. I guess to be fair, I could like that instead, which looks a little bit nicer, although it doesn't actually function any different. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I figured that the crane parts were probably going to be the best way to go just because they're larger than, like, they're less dense. And as a result, you can take up a lot more space with them. And that seemed like sort of the right choice until I got to the end where I'm trying to, like, taper everything together. And it's just kicking my ass in that regard.
Well, it still looks hella fly, so...
Yeah. The basics of something, it could be good, but it isn't yet.
All I'm saying, combo still sounds pretty fire. Always up for more combo builds, so...
Yeah. I don't know. The goal wasn't to make another fusion build.
Seems to how it, you know, turns to though, yeah.
Yeah, it really does. Don't even have decor on this thing either. To be fair, yours doesn't, but...
Gotta add more ducks, GG. That's what I was saving the extra tonnage for the original build, is actually placing the ducks on. Just haven't done that quite yet.
Yeah. I don't know. I think maybe... yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. The struggle.
Well, like, once you fill or if you get the internals in, might also fill the space and sort of see what's left to work with, right?
Barely.
Oh,
Like I can
alrighty.
shove everything you have, including potentially the mystery modules. Let's just say, for giggles, it's the, you know, averter. I'm not worried about it being placed functionally, just slapping them in right now. That only gets, like, a quarter of the backspace filled.
Alrighty, well, only 1/4 left to get sorted then, right? That's how it works?
Another quarter to get half sorted.
Yeah.
Nah. I don't know. I suppose you could literally just leave the back like open and make it as if it's a fusion build without it actually being a fusion build, you know?
Yeah. I don't know the part name, but there's a decor piece, and it's like an exposed engine. Sort of looks like rubble. Could make it like a truck with like rubble in the back with that painted.
An engine?
Yeah. I can grab the name of it. It's not an engine. It's a decor piece, but it sort of looks like an engine or car internals.
Are you talking about the Ravager parts?
Maybe. Let me grab the name of it real quick. Which I can say and actually do now, because, you know,
This stuff?
Xbox's speed. It's not loading.
What's not loading?
The page you're on.
What do you mean page I'm on?
Yep, that one. There.
Yeah. That's Ravager stuff. This is akin to Crossout heresy.
Oh, wow. Here I was thinking Ravagers were cool. This
Well,
struggle.
they are. It's part of the problem.
Sounds like the devs are encouraging it.
Something like that. Yeah, because you could run like that, and then like pretty up the modules and whatnot, and just have like sort of a flat bed cut out.
Mhm. Well, and, like, I'm not generally showing the back of the build to bots, or ideally shouldn't be showing the back of the build to bots, right? So.
Yeah, well, but likewise to that end, like part of the reason why I pulled the cabin back was to try and protect it more. So, I mean, having all this armor on the back, again, yes, looks good. Helps the build survive, no. And then I'd still probably want to, like, get rid of all the, like, exposed parts somehow.
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that does look pretty fucking fly.
Pretty spicy, yeah. I can dig it.
Oh, by the way, not that I suspect you were expecting a different answer, but haven't heard anything yet still on the whole missed resources from servers being wonky on Warframe. So it's possible their official answer is just regrind it, TM.
That's sort of what my vibe is, or the vibe I'm getting. Like, they would have said something otherwise, right? They've already announced the reroll for the event, so... I think, unfortunately, it's very much a sucks to suck situation.
TM. Yeah.
Oh. You were able to grab a screenshot of yours, right?
Yeah. Well, I literally asked them, like, should I be submitting a ticket for something? And, like, nothing. So, might do it just
like,
to do it, but...
Yeah, I'd say if you have proof that you got it, then you should, you know, try and get it at least.
Yeah. Well, I guess theoretically, we're only missing my samples, right? Because you have enough that if you got them back, they'd just be, like, helping you build stuff, which you're not currently building at the moment anyway.
Yeah, so...
Partial victory.
Something like that. Yeah, and then they have the double resources today.
Yeah.
That's always cool. Should be good to hopefully stay on a bit later than last night, so can try and grind stuff out. If there's any resources you're looking for in particular?
Just that which we've been robbed of.
Understandable. Thanks, devs. Super cool that they did the barrow thing, like linking them together. No, there's a bunch of new mods in the current. There's a new particular mod, by the way.
Yeah, I already picked it up.
That's it. Me too. I'm excited. 2 more to go. Woo.
Thought you already had the critical one.
No, I have none of the peculiar ones, except for this one. It is part of the reason I'm interested in grinding out Elite Onslaught.
I'm not so sure I'd call it good news, but definitely enough Kuva weapons to make it useful.
Yeah, I'm about to re-rank up my Ionka there, so only what, 3 more to go? But soon it'll be ready for Profit Taker.
And then watch that idea fail horribly, but at least you still have the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, this looks half decent. But I'm still not happy with the results so far.
Hmm? Still just look, or?
Yeah. Well, and like functionally is the big thing.
Gotta pull her into a hard raid and find out if she works, you know? Gotta test and see. Could be hard raid viable.
You know, I guess if I just like dropped the entire thing by 1 layer, that would have made it a lot easier. Cause I can
Okay.
literally, I'm just gonna save over your version real quick. Well, maybe not. That's what build history is for. I can do like this and just drop down everything 3 pips, you know? And that would save a lot. But then I still need to find a way to taper up to the roof.
I don't know what they're called, but they're really long pieces. They have one flat side and then the second, it's 2 pips. 1 pip is like a solid square and the other is like a tapered off one. Could those maybe fit?
I have no idea what you're getting at, bro.
Oh my. It is a Steppenwolf sword. It's the...
You talking about the 1x1x8? This?
Oh, I see. A little bit behind. Second.
The streaming do be like that.
Not quite. It's bigger. Like if you scroll down. Sort of like the one that's on top of the track.
On top of the drag.
Yeah, so there's the one you got
Are you talking about
highlighted.
the strength and sloped?
Yep. Yes. Strength and slope.
Okay, what about it?
Would that work for at all or no?
For what?
If you like lowered the pips, lowered it, like just getting for the aesthetic of it or look of it.
I mean, kind of, not really. I mean, I pointed this out a lot earlier in the stream, where like it's gonna be an issue of like trying to like marry the rounded part of the machinist with the flat part of the machinist and the Steppenwolfs, and then the other quote-unquote rounded part of the Steppenwolfs, which again is all just angled, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't really like those parts just because of their profile.
What?
Like
Oh
it almost works really, really good, but it doesn't, and it's like nigh impossible to taper that off because there aren't any like 1x1 or 1/1 I guess a slope of 1 parts that are corners, you know?
Yeah.
Because in order to do that you'd have to have something that's, I mean, a 1x1 corner part,
Yeah.
and the closest we have is the strengthened twin slope, but it's an interior corner, it's not an exterior. So it's for
Rough.
linking 2 parts that are sloped on the inside rather than the outside.
Yeah. Rough.
I don't know.
Oh, I quite like those parts. They look pretty nice.
It's close to looking really, really good. But the problem is it's just not currently looking really, really good.
Oh, but it's so close.
Yeah, I do not know what the solution is. I think just for the sake of me actually eating the food I ordered, I might need to just end the stream and then, you know, eat. And then figure this out at some other time. Plus we still have raids to do before reset.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is can attach the power node. Even in its dumb little corner.
Yay.
Story of Crossout, everything being so close and yet so far.
Yeah. Should be their slogan or something. Seems to be how most builds go, though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I don't know. What the solution to all these problems are, other than get over it and deal with the build not looking the absolute best you envisioned it to be. But
Oh, I know what the answer
where's
is.
the fun?
Fusion build. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Gonna go back to the old saying of more. Can always have more. Comes to fusion builds.
Because we can't, doesn't mean we should.
I think it's a should in this situation, you know? 8 tacklers, 1 build. I don't know, seems like a good time.
I would not want the second vehicle to be running forward weapons on this. You definitely want turreted. Otherwise, you have 2 people who can just be killed by somebody getting behind.
Okay, so the front build is, or I see. So this part of the build has the forward-facing guns, and then the backpack build or the coupled part will have backward-facing machine
People just
ones.
walk beside you.
And then you say no, don't do that, and then they listen. Just easy.
Right. Yeah.
It's when turning comes in, and then you just sort of push them, and then you get sauce to either the front or the back, and then the guns take care of it. Like, yeah, it could work.
Yeah, I don't know. I do not know what the solution to this is. Like, I kind of like where it's going, but also, like, dang. Just dang. Ugh. Are you leaving your blueprint up on the exhibition for a while?
Yep. I got no need to take it down, so.
Cool. I will continue to use that as a reference.
Sounds good.
But I'm gonna save the work here. So, whoopsie. So I can eat. And then we can
Sounds
read.
good.
And then I'll have to, I guess, I was hoping this was gonna be a one video thing, but it looks like I might end up having to do multiple on this topic.
It'd be good. Gonna get those, subscribers coming back for part 2, right?
Yeah, right. Ugh. I hate how good that looks there.
Pretty
There's
fire.
the
I'll give
machinist
you that.
little wings.
Ooh, machinist needs
But it's a
wings.
bumper, so like it doesn't actually add any fucking durability. People aren't gonna shoot it at it.
But it looks like hella dope. Worth it. For the aesthetic.
Yeah.
Like, personally, I think for the aesthetic is a valid reason to toss it there.
Yeah, I do not know. This is gonna be one with more than a few updates, I'm sure.
Part 3, you say? Who?